everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And you guys remember Disney's Tarzan, right? This came out around the same time as Hercules and Mulan, mid-90s. And Phil Collins did the music on it. And Phil Collins, he's a wizard. There's a reason that he's got a great reputation as a thoughtful musician. He's one of the few people I've seen who can really do the percussion thing and the singing thing well at once. He was a part of Genesis, a very thoughtful band. I think Peter Gabriel was the guy that fronted that band before, but everybody associates Phil Collins with Genesis. He wrote probing, thoughtful material when I was in high school, and I knew that he had this reputation, or at least he did in my brain. And so when I watched Disney's Tarzan and the song called Son of Man came on, my little youthful Christian brain was like, you're too smart. That's not an accident, Phil Collins. You're doing something there. You're making some kind of artistic point. And the song goes like this: "Oh, the power to be strong and the wisdom to be wise. All these things will come to you in time. On this journey that you're making, there'll be answers that you seek. And it's you who'll climb the mountain. It's you who'll reach the peak. Son of man, look to the sky. Lift your spirit, set it free. Someday you'll walk tall with pride. Son of man, a man in time you'll be." Well, son of man, if you've poked around the Bible at all, you know is an expression that has two meanings between the Old Testament and New Testament, but one meaning that Jesus really leans into in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, most notably in the book of Ezekiel, God keeps calling Ezekiel son of man. And it seems like that language is about reminding Ezekiel that he's just some dude, that he's a human, that he's a normal guy. And in contrast to the glory and the imminence of God and the not so much glory and normalness and pedestrianness of some guy. But Daniel also uses the language son of man. And I'm actually going to turn to that one because there is one just red hot smoking gun example. So it's Daniel chapter 7. What's going on here is that Daniel is having the insane, hard to comprehend prophecy about the beasts. If you don't remember this, you're absolutely fine. And I don't have the time nor probably the competence to properly unpack everything that's going on here. But clearly, Daniel here is prophesying about future things, some kind of standoff between unfolding evil and opponents to God and his kingdom and God himself. And this standoff is what gets us to verse 13 and that phrase, son of man, that Phil Collins employs and that we're talking about today with Jesus. It goes like this: "In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." And then over the rest of Daniel 7, he's troubled by what he's seen. He's gaming all this stuff out, but there are a couple more phrases that really pop for what you and I have been talking about in Matthew with all this kingdom language and everything. Verse 18 says, "But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever." And then verse 22, "Until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom." And then bumping ahead to verse 27 for the sake of efficiency, "Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him." So if you've been hanging out with me at all through the course of going through Matthew, this language is popping for you. How much more so, my friends, must that language have popped for the original audience for whom the scriptures, the Old Testament as we call it, are Avengers, Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, Star Wars, all storytelling and adventures and legends all rolled into one. I mean, this was everything about the narrative that they were raised around. They knew this prose inside and out, and it wasn't just a legend or a myth to them. This was all predictive of a redemption they believed was coming, not just for them, but for everything, a straightening out of all the stuff that was wrong. There's this language of this kingdom promised all the way back to David and his descendants is supposed to happen. And so their antennae aren't out for it just because they're conspiracy theorists and they find it interesting. This has bearing on the original audience's immediate life, immediate fortunes, and they would have been profoundly familiar with and invested in thinking deeply and deeply internalizing these kind of passages. So when we look at the Phil Collins song, it looks, because of the language about a very mutable, that is a very changeable character who is evolving in Tarzan as the son of man of the song, it's pretty easy to conclude that here we're getting the son of man as a combination of the nobility of humankind, but also the humility of humankind, more like the way the term is employed in the book of Ezekiel, and less like the term is employed in the book of Daniel. But unlike the Phil Collins song, when we come to the book of Matthew, that Son of Man expression looks like it's talking more about the Son of Man described in Daniel than Ezekiel, not focused on the humility of the person with the potential for nobility, but focused on the Redeemer, the one that the Ancient of Days is going to employ to bring about this kingdom that is fulfilled and that lasts forever. Jesus introduces the term, I think in chapter 8, and maybe it appears earlier. If it does, let me know. But 8:20 is the first place where it comes to mind for me. And remember, this is where Jesus just came off the Sermon on the Mount. People are really impressed. They're not sure what to make of him. He does a bunch of miracles. Now everybody's got Jesus fever, and they're coming up to him. They're like, oh, I'll follow you. And so verse 18, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came and said, Teacher, I'll go with you wherever you go. But then Jesus replied, Foxes have holes. You remember this stuff. And birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And that's it. There's no further clarification in that immediate phrase or that immediate passage. The guy who wants to follow Jesus wherever he goes, he doesn't ask any follow-up questions about what the Son of Man thing might mean. But by arranging things in such a way that Jesus just throws that phrase out and it's just sitting there, that's Matthew putting the juiciest, most perfect fly on the end of his line and dropping it in front of the trout like, hey, look at this. I know that one's going to get your attention. And so that's just floating there. And then in the next two little anecdotes, we get a little more clarity on whether or not Jesus meant Son of Man like Ezekiel, Son of Man, like just a humble dude, or more like the Daniel 7 Son of Man, like exalted servant of the king who's the one who will bring about the kingdom. Because next, he calms the seas and everybody's like, all right, who is this guy? And then after that, he goes and he casts out the demons. And the demons in 8:29 specifically say, what do you want with us, Son of God? So we're getting clarity on this, but Matthew has just teased the idea that Jesus is drawing on this title. Then we get into chapter 9, and remember they lower down the paralytic through the roof. Well, that's the Luke account that gives us that detail. And Jesus goes to heal him, but people are kind of grumpy about the forgiveness thing that he does first. And then Jesus says, but so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And he says to the paralytic, get up, take your mat, and go home. Okay, well, if there's any question lingering from chapter 8 about which version of Son of Man Jesus is drawing on, now it's answered, because even the Pharisees just a couple verses before are like, what? Only God can forgive sins. This is blasphemy. And Jesus is like, dang right, only God can forgive sins. But that you would know that the Son of Man in the Daniel 7 sense has the authority to forgive sins. Watch this. I'm going to make this guy's legs work, even though they didn't work just a second ago. Then we get to Matthew chapter 10 and the passage we've been looking at. And there's this verse that has two important parts. One is the phrase Son of Man. The other is the future predictive thing that we're going to have to break down next time around. Jesus is describing how it's going to work out in the future, and he says, brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. All men will hate you because of me, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. I tell you the truth. You won't finish going through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Bottom line is this. Jesus intentionally employs a title that gets used in neighboring books in the Old Testament two different ways. Early on in the public stuff that Jesus is doing here, it seems like he's still going for a little bit of the cryptic you figure it out routine. Telling some people, yeah, don't go tell anybody about this miracle, keeping it under wraps here, letting his guys go out and do the talking for him here in chapter 10. But as we go along, Jesus also becomes more overt and just saying, here's who I am, and here's exactly what I'm doing. So it's a brilliant use of a term from the Old Testament that really has the two elements of the nature of Jesus in it. Humanity and deity are both present in Jesus, according to the Bible and historical Christianity, but humanity and deity are also both present just in that title within the Bible itself. With that in mind, my friends, we are better equipped next time around to go and try to unravel this really difficult passage about what Jesus means when he says, I tell you the truth, you won't finish going through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Thank you so much for passing this podcast along to other people. Thank you so much for the reviews. We had a ton of new people jump in just this week here in the last few days. That's awesome. That's because of you. And so thank you for sharing this with people. A podcast being bigger than it was in the past really isn't that big a deal. But we're talking about cool stuff. And if we figure out how to talk about it in a way that makes us like each other more and makes things better, there's a lot of good that can come out of that. So thank you for helping me with that. And if there's actually a deity on the other end of this thing, then maybe even more good can come out of that. So thank you for helping me to make this a thing that includes more people. That's really awesome of you. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Let's do it again soon.